Hello, and welcome to our World Environment Forum webinar series. At the end of this webinar, we will reveal a discount code for our forthcoming World Built Environment Forum Summit, which is taking place in New York on the 13th and 14th of May. We'll also be giving you some details of some of our natural capital and regenerative landscape publications that you can download for free from the RICS site. My name is John Krause. I'm Director of External Affairs at RICS. Today, we will be discussing the business case for implementing a natural capital and ecosystems approach into business strategy and planning processes. Humanity is currently using nature's resources 1.7 times faster than our planet's ecosystems can regenerate, according to the Global Footprint Network. And a report by the National Capital Coalition back in 2013 claimed that water shortage could have a business-critical impact on 40% of Fortune 100 companies. We have a leading panel of experts with us today, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves now. Firstly, from Paris, we have Véronique Dame.
Hello.
Hello, Véronique. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So, yes, I'm coming from Paris and before become an expert and biodiversity consultant. I've been a business journalist for 16 years, and I created in 2005 Gondwana, the first and leading biodiversity consulting firm for the French private and public sectors. So I have assisted major French and international companies in the consideration and implementation of biodiversity through their activities. So, and I accompany many actors in real estate and development like Gessina, Altarea Cogedim, Bouygues Real Estate, Grand Paris Aménagement, etc. I'm a specialist of nature in the city and its benefits, and have the chance to develop the first biodiversity plan for the city of Paris almost 10 years ago now. And my previous company merged with another bigger company, and so very recently I create a new company for biodiversity, and it's called Biodiv Corp, and I'm still assisted companies and public communities to implement biodiversity in their activities. And I'm also a member of the French group of experts of the IPBS. It's a strange acronym for the equivalent for biodiversity compared to the IPCC for climate change.
Thank you, Véronique, and I'm sure some of those points you mentioned will come up in the discussions later on. Secondly, joining us, we've got Dr. Mark Everard, who's in the UK, and he's an Associate Professor of Ecosystem Services at the University of West of England. Mark.
Hello, good afternoon. Well, look, I've been doing ecosystem services stuff since the 1980s in academia, in NGOs, working with businesses, and also in the public sector. The UK public sector was a bit slow to take this up relative to the global community, but I was 22 years in all in the public sector. The last few years of that were with DEFRA, very heavily involved in the UK National Ecosystem Assessment, the Natural Environment White Paper, and the Payment for Ecosystem Service Strategy. Most of my work now is developing world, particularly around water, but I keep involved in the ecosystems agenda. For example, I advise the European plastics industry, which is quite a hot one at the moment, and various other businesses. I'm also quite a communicator. apart from my scientific papers, I've published something like 28 books, and I'm fairly regularly on the TV and radio, that sort of thing. I've been a Spring Watch presenter, amongst other things. So actually, communicating is absolutely vital to change public psyche around the urgency of these matters.
Thank you, Mark. And thirdly, communicating with us today, all the way from Mauritius, we've got Anil Singh Rana, FRICS, who's founder of CPD Limited. Anil.
Oh, hi. Thanks, John, and thank you, Dr. Mark, and thank you, Veronique, for being here today. So, yeah, I mean, it's an honor and pleasure to be around Veronique and Dr. Mark today. And greeting from Mauritius. Very hot here today. So, yeah, I'm the founder of Constructing Professional Development, CPD Limited, providing talks for the built environment. I've delivered 45 talks so far for the past 5 years, encompassing different training based in built environment. So from sustainability to health and safety to latest technology happening right now in construction. I'm a project manager. I'm a young people ambassador in the construction industry. I've been in the UK for 13 years now. I'm based in Mauritius. And I'm also a motivational speaker for young people in construction, as well as for chartered surveyors, not just in Mauritius, but globally. So yeah, my experience purely is in construction, and natural capital cannot be, as much important as everything else, because what we do in construction here in Mauritius affect every single issues in terms of biodiversity ecosystem. So, I'm delighted to be part of this because I have a lot to share. And, being a small island is whatever is happening in Africa, in Dubai, in Europe, is having an impact, on Mauritius, directly or indirectly. So, thank you, and obviously delighted to be part of this panel today.
Okay, wonderful. So we really got a global perspective on this issue today. I want to open with a first question, and this one's really just for Veronique to answer, and it's really to set a baseline for us. What actually is natural capital, and why is it so important from a business perspective?
Of course, it's important from a business perspective. All businesses depend and impact upon ecosystem services in some way. For example, leading companies understand or begin to understand that fresh water is a critical input for most, if it not all, major industrial processes. The same for food production, about pollination and pest regulation. So unfortunately, biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation are continuing to escalate, thereby putting business at risk. So the risks are real, but if managed properly, they can be transformed into new opportunities. So this will put strong demands on business to measure and report their action to conserve as well as sustainability use and share the benefits of ecosystem and biodiversity. The ability to factor ecosystem value into business decision making is becoming an ever more pressing need because, one, there is increasing evidence that ongoing ecosystem degradation has a material impact on companies, undermining performance, profits, their license to operate, and access to new markets. And second, new opportunities are emerging that are linked in some way to restoring and managing ecosystem. For example, according to the WBCSD, the World Business Council Sustainable Development Vision Project for 2050, sustainable related global business opportunities in natural resources may be in the order of $2 to $6 trillion per annum So it's huge. Third, communities, NGOs, customer, consumer, and shareholders are becoming increasingly conscious on the interrelationship between business operation and the state of ecosystem, and they are demanding that these issues are addressed, reported, and accounted for. And four, meanwhile, in many parts of the world, regulation and legal requirements for companies to minimize and mitigate their ecosystem impacts and to fully compensate any damage caused are becoming more strict. So yes, it's very important for business.
Thank you. I think that's a powerful description there. At the heart of most industrial processes, we have water, and then this idea that one way to address this is to have a measure of reporting and sharing a good practice mechanism. I'd like to ask our audience now, because we're going to put a poll up for you. Just ask you right at the beginning of this discussion: do you believe that business growth and environmental protection can happily coexist? Is there a tension there? These two things don't work together, or can we really achieve a coexistence of business growth and environmental protection? So please fill out the online form. And while you're doing that, also just to tell you that there is an opportunity to submit questions to the panel from your screen. There's a question box just below the presentation that you can use for that. So quick responses, and I'll let you know what we find. And what we see is that, in fact, there's large agreement to this idea that business growth and environmental protection can happily coexist. 57% say they agree, 28% say they strongly agree, and we've got about 14% saying they disagree. So that's a very positive, I think, message of optimism. What do our panel make of that? Mark, perhaps, what do you think of that?
Well, I can't see the poll results, actually, but I heard what you said. Obviously, this is something of a self-selecting audience, so as a scientist, I couldn't give you a statistical confidence about that. That said, look, we've all got bank accounts, and we know that if we've not got money in the bank account, then we can't draw money and spend it. And the natural capital argument is very much the same. If we want the services of nature, then we have to ensure that we have money in the bank, and that is natural capital. And I'd like at this point just to draw that very clear distinction. We use the flows from nature, the services from nature, and mustn't get too hung up on the static capital. Otherwise, we can end up in confusion when it comes to monetization.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Anil, what do you make of that? Most people there saying they strongly agree that business growth and environmental protection can work together.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, John and I think Veronique and Dr. Mark has, I think, clearly mentioned, the issues regarding natural capital. But for me, being in the industry for 17 years now, especially in the construction industry, because we use a lot of resources, lots of raw material, we produce lots of CO2 emission as well. It's hugely important because, and I think we've got a stage where, in terms of, I think the awareness is not there. Because if you were asking me about, 6 months ago, what was natural capital, I wouldn't know. And that's the thing is, and many of my friends in the industry, they don't know. Before I came on this platform today, I said, I'll be talking on natural capital. And I said to my friend, do you know what it is? And she said, well, it's, I think, human resource. So the awareness is not there. But I just want to describe quickly on natural capital. For me, it's the global, I think it's good to have a definition as well. I think the definition is always there. But it's the global stock of natural assets consisting of air, water, rivers, land, all living things, and more importantly, sea. We are surrounded by the ocean here. So I'm only 10 minutes away from the sea, and we use it as Dr. Mark just said. It's free services. But what are we doing to invest in our reef, in our corals? There's a lot of work to be done there. So I think from a business perspective, we don't have much choice. Business will have to adapt. I think between the built and natural environment, we have to have a rethink of what we built, how we built it, and even it is even necessary in the first place, as the consequences are global. I think what we are building in Europe right now, or even in major cities in Europe, can have massive effect in Africa and numerous islands in Mauritius, being one of them. The figures and facts have been given by Veronique. We know that we'll get more about that during this conversation later on. But I think from my perspective, again, coming from an island, is the long-term viability of businesses depend on maintaining particular issues happening right now, especially with freshwater, forests, and biodiversity. All are being consumed at an alarming rate. And I think if you look at it, John, we are surrounded by hotels as well. There's lots of hotels in Mauritius. And it's hard to find the balance between attracting more tourists in Mauritius, but at the same time invest on our seashore and ensuring that the biodiversity and aquamarine is right here. So recently we had again touching on natural capital and also why business needs to take into account these issues. We are starting to have a lot of severe flash flood, which never been seen before. It's unprecedented. And even the drought here is worsening. So again, these are issues that we need to grasp now and start creating awareness of how business can look into this and reinvest in nature. The flash flood here are killing people as well. So things are changing. It's not the same as we've seen before. So to me, ultimately, this makes a strong business case because for human communities to sustain themselves, particularly in an already stressed ecosystem. And I think also we've seen here in Mauritius as well, we used to have bamboos surrounding, like hedges, if you like, bamboo surrounding our properties. Now people have got, concrete wall, concrete foundation, and this is an issue regarding flooding. So again, we need to create a lot of awareness in order to ensure that those things doesn't make major displacement.
So when we talk about the need for awareness, and it's clearly a major challenge to achieve that, do you think that the adoption of natural capital strategies amongst commercial organisations is well achieved at the moment, or is it something which has a long way to go? How widespread is that use of natural capital strategies?
We have a long way. We have a long way to go. Seriously, we have a long way to go, and it's not in our business planning at the moment. It's not on the agenda. Even when we are working in the construction industry, it's nowhere near. The only thing we'll probably do is an environmental impact assessment on most construction projects. But when it comes to have that on the agenda of businesses and firms, it's nowhere near to be seen. And I've got a strong feeling it's probably because of lack of awareness and education, and even the government is not fully aware. So I think it's about having those conversations which we are having right now, which I can take away. So lots of work ahead, John.
That's quite a challenge you're setting out for us. I wonder, Veronique, how do you see the adoption of natural capital strategies in commercial organisations? Because I guess in Europe, we may be seeing a slightly different picture to Mauritius.
Yes, I agree with Daniel. Let's face it, companies for whom biodiversity is a top priority for now are very few. And few of them are using natural or environmental accounting. It's a new concept. It's a very, very beginning of this concept, because I will say that from my point of view, most companies ignore that they rely from nature, except big corporates. But most corporates, small or big, they are mainly focused on their impact and ways to reduce their footprint. So most of the time when they are focused on biodiversity subject, they use different tools to assess impacts, negative impacts of industrial plants, product manufacturing or building construction. So for now, and I think it's very urgent, the key challenge for organization is one to become aware of their dependency with nature. And most of them, as I said, they ignore that. And second, it's to tracking and try to evaluate and to put value on these dependencies. That's the big challenge.
Okay, that's two very big things there, getting the awareness and the understanding of the true connection with nature and how we value it.
And John.
Yes, Mark.
And John, can I just add on to Veronique? Go on, Mark, sorry.
Okay, go, Anil, by all means.
Yeah, so what Veronique just mentioned, which is a very pertinent point, and earlier what Dr. Mark said, what I'm noticing as well, someone who's coming new into natural capital, is yes, we need to have all these tools and we need to create those awareness and we need to implement measures. But do we have the expertise? Do we have the expertise to implement those? And if we have, how do we get to create more of these expertise and more of these experts coming over to educate us? Maybe something Dr. Mark can touch on that.
Okay. Would you like me to come in at this point?
Yeah, yes, Mark, please do. Yes.
Okay. Look, I'll just sort of kick off with, I gave a keynote in a conference in Mumbai last week. And one of the points I made is how odd it was we were speaking in English in India. And the reasons very simply go back to 1760, when we invented the Industrial Revolution, completely decimated our natural resource base, and so created an age of empire to ostensibly bring civilization to the world, but actually to steal everyone's stuff. And that's why we speak English. And when the Industrial Revolution was set, the governance system, the economics, are pretty much unreconstructed to how they are now, marginally revised, but largely unreconstructed. So the assumptions of business aren't malign, but they're based on this idea that the earth is boundless and that consumers are the limiting factor. And yet today we live in a world where the earth is clearly not boundless and consumers are, well, there's 7.7 billion of them. So the model, the business model, is fundamentally flawed against the modern world. Given that that is the backdrop, there is still this sense that protecting the natural world is an act of altruism rather than an act of symbiosis and complete dependence. Veronique made a very good point about our dependence on the natural world. And the businesses that are in the lead here, water companies, drinks companies, who realize that they're water limited. Other people, for example, the setting up of the Forest Stewardship Council, recognizing that forest products come from a finite source. Marine Stewardship Council, the new pressures on palm oil, the awareness of marine plastics, that we can't just assist with the linear model. And one of the ways I like to talk to business is, don't think about this as, we must for altruistic reasons, whatever. This is risk management, pure and simple. It's risk in terms of security of supply, reputation, liabilities. We are totally embedded in the natural world, totally dependent, but the mindset of this post-industrial revolution governance and economic system is somehow still that the nature is infinite and inviolable, whereas the reality is somewhat different.
So, Mark, here's a question that you might want to address in that case. Are you saying effectively that businesses are kind of exhausting one resource, and when it's depleted, they then just start to use another one that will ultimately become depleted, or are they taking a more intelligent approach to resource use?
Well, the basic habit of business, return to shareholders, maximize profit, within that governance model is going to the cheapest place where labor and resources are. So if we deplete one resource, we can always go to another country or use a different material or mine a different ecosystem. But at the end of the day, that model is broken because we will run out of places and things and people. So the mindset of boundlessness is the one that we need to change. Some businesses that have run into this brick wall in the past, as I say, drinks industries, forest product industries, marine product industries, have taken very much a leadership role. I'm a big fan of the Forest Stewardship Council, the Marine Stewardship Council, and I like what some of the water companies are doing in terms of working at landscape scale to produce a cleaner water resource rather than spending more money cleaning a dirty resource. So these are the people that are beginning to get it because they have run up hard against the finite limits of the ecosystems that their bottom financial line rests upon.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to ask Veronique to have a go at answering this next question, which I think leads very naturally from what we've just been talking about. How are organizations accounting for these natural dependencies and the liabilities that might come with that?
So, as I said, few companies today are aware of their dependency with nature, but some of big corporates in France and all the world start to be aware of a big fail in the supply chain. So there are different tools for that, and they start to try to test different tools. Maybe you know about the tool called ESR. It's Ecosystem Services Review. It has been developed by the WBCSD and the WRA. And they also create another tool called the CEV. It's the Corporate Ecosystem Valuation, developed by RRM, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the IUCN. So the idea is to create process to make better informed business decisions by explicitly valuing both ecosystem degradation and the benefits provided by ecosystem services. So it's a system to value ecosystem, and the company's aim is to improve corporate performance in relation to social and environmental goals and the financial bottom line. It's very important. Another methodology is what we call in my company, it's the biodiversity LCA, the life cycle analysis. It's very close to the natural capital protocol. And the idea is simple. All along the value chain of the product, from supply in raw materials, manufacturing, transportation to the end of the life of the product, we are exploring all the links with nature and ecosystem services in terms of impact, but also in terms of dependencies to produce and to sell the product. So the idea, it's not necessary to put number to quantify because it's quite difficult, but it's to build for company a kind of awareness and to help them to understand their biodiversity footprint, and then they can have priorities in choice based on its sustainable strategy. So maybe they will, for example, for the food business, when you use the biodiversity LCO, you can see that you can even quantify the dependency for the raw materials, and not. The idea is not only to say, I'm just in food business, I'm not a farmer, so it's not my fault. It's just to demonstrate at them that they can be attacked by NGO, by consumer about their responsibility, because they are not only food manufacturer, but they are responsible for the impact, positive or negative, of all the raw material that they have used in their products. So it's a methodology, I will say, not to quantify, but to put awareness in the company, because it's very hard for businessmen today to understand that they depend with nature. It's for us, it's very evident, but not for businesses. So we try to use, simple tools and very pedagogic methodology, and we do this work with them. Not only the consultant alone is in office. It doesn't work. We have to work and to make a constraint work with businesses, because at the end they understand and they say, okay, I understand, and without this raw material, if there is a tax, if there is a new law, and other things, maybe tomorrow I won't be able to sell my product. That's exactly what L'Oréal did 5 years ago. They do a big assessment to explore and to check all the plants that they use in their cosmetic products, and then they check all the plants that they are on the risk of disappear, and then they open eyes and realize that more than 40% of the money of the sale of their products relies to biodiversity, and even they try to produce more synthetic products, they're still dependent with nature. So at the end of the day, sometimes we can't put number, and Monday on the table and say, if you don't put some action to stop, to explore and under consuming some materials, that's the end of the day. It's for you.
Thank you, and I think the L'Oréal example there is a very interesting one. I'd probably like to explore that further if we had time. I put another question up, and I think, Mark, this is really building on what Veronique has just been touching on, the practical management systems and frameworks that organizations are using to account for these dependencies. What's your view of this? What are you seeing in industry?
Well, look, I think the first thing I'd say is contextual, and that is that an awful lot of companies over the years haven't thought systemically. So when I published a paper in 2007 with Greenpeace saying, well, Brundtland 20 years on, sustainable development defined 20 years on, we found 200-300 different definitions where people picked out the bit they wanted and ignored the rest. Which is a sort of misses the whole point that we were looking at the world as a connected whole. So when we come into looking at our dependency with ecosystems, we need to have that systemic frame of mind. not just to look at a little piece of it, manage that well, and maybe externalize the rest. There are a lot of management frameworks out there. The triple bottom line, we're all familiar with: economy, ecology, society. It's not all about sustainable profit, which is the way some people defined it. The ecosystem approach, the ecosystem service framework, the 5 capitals model, STEEP, which is a big favorite one of mine: social, technological, ecological, economic, and political. And the natural step, which is another one I've used. We could add to that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But we need to move into a mindset of not cherry-picking the bits of the system that we like, but thinking about the fact that our technology choice has an environmental impact, positive or negative, a social impact, positive or negative. The policy environment, the economic environment, steers us in a particular way that has ramifications across that system. So the first thing I'd say, therefore, is no matter what model you use, do think in a systems sort of way. This is where our regulatory legacy really lets us down. Because if you look at the way government departments are framed and legislation is framed, it generally focuses on one bit here, an air quality issue there, a loss of species thing there, and whatever, rather than looking at the whole. So the regulatory model really needs to evolve massively if we're to make serious societal headway with this, in looking at things in a very connected way. But the first thing businesses can do is make sure that whatever conceptual framework they use, and they will not make traction without a conceptual framework, is really joined up and not just cherry-picking the bits that are easy to manage.
A very clear message there about systemic thinking, which is always a challenge, I think, in every field of business. So let's look at that a little bit in terms of the financial value. If we start attaching financial value to natural capital, or the risk that we have to nature in our operations, is it just another commodity? People can just trade the damage they're doing and have a healthy conscience, or is there something more useful and tangible that can be achieved by attaching financial value? Veronique?
Yes, indeed, there are some kind of polemics, controversies surrounding accounting, valuing, or pricing nature. Both in terms of methodology and philosophy. About the methodology side, there is many questions. So how value the nature, how calculate cost and benefits from using ecosystem servicing with pricing and by whom. So there are a lot of questions, and but we have some answers. The famous study, the TIB, the Economics of Ecosystem and Biodiversity study, initiated in 2007, has emphasized the concept of ecosystem valuation as a practical and influential aid to decision making. So this is help to value the benefit of ecosystem services or the cost of damage ecosystem services. So, and there are many examples of this within different areas in the world. I have an example in Vietnam, where plantation and protection of 2,000 hectares of mangroves costed more than $1 million. But at the end of the day, it saved more than $7 million of annual spending for the maintenance of the seawall of the dams. So we can put some numbers, some price of nature. In Botswana, natural capital is 1/3 of the total wealth of the country. So pricing nature sometimes could be an answer to the common goods without price and with over consummation. And I think it opens door to new markets, especially for countries with a very rich biodiversity. About the philosophic side, the question is, can we consider biodiversity as an economic commodity? Of course, I would say, of course not, because with nature, we are talking about life, and we can put a price on life. And global nature merchandising is improbable and not very desirable for me, from my point of view. So I think that the question is not to put a price of nature, but maybe to approach nature from an economic, financial point of view. There is no taboo with that. In a building center, the value of a building with view and access to nature is higher. And I will say it's the same for a company who take nature into account, and it will be better rated in ethical indexes. So for me, there is no taboo, but the idea is not to say that this species, this ecosystem, this habitat, it's this price. There is no sense. It's just to give new tools, and I think a new approach to can use economic tools and very strong and solid to find new way to protect nature.
Thank you. Anil, in listening to that, I was thinking about the construction industry, which is your area, and people say that in that sector, particularly, certainly in the UK, the margins are very, very slim for constructors. So if those profit margins are very slim, how is it realistic then for them to start factoring in issues around the costs of natural capital risk? How does it sound to you from a construction perspective? Anil? I think we may have lost Anil temporarily.
Can you hear us now? Yes, can you hear us? Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, so no, I think we in the construction industry and in the engineering industry, we operate on a very, very low margin, and I think recently in the UK, you had, major companies who carried in, and also Interserve, who went into administration. They were huge companies. They were doing a lot for sustainability. They're doing lots of CSR, but they all went into administration purely because we were working on a really, really low margin. So to answer your question, John, it's a massive issue for us here. And in the industry of, say, in the Europe, you do have a lot of support, but if you come into developing countries, in Mauritius and in various countries in Africa, we don't even think about this because the priority is not there. And this is why I think we're doing this today, is to look into creating this awareness. But construction industry is more of a survival industry. And I think I was talking to somebody the other day as well. It's on natural capital, and the challenge for us here is how do we allow for costs, which for something we need to analyze. Now, Veronique mentioned about we need to look at some sort of how do we go about measuring it. I would even go further. RICS is a great champion in terms of international standards. So maybe we need to look into some sort of international measurement standards for natural capital, because at the moment it's a bit subjective, probably still will be subjective, but how do you measure it internationally? The ocean around Mauritius, the seashore around Mauritius might be different from Seychelles. I know Sky News was doing a lot of work in terms of the amount of plastic being thrown into the Indian Ocean and Seychelles. This could differ from Mauritius, so how do you put a value against it? Hence probably the creation of an international measurement standard, something we can think about. But in terms of again, because our clients don't pay normally, we are living in an era at the moment of more for less, you know. So I felt in my industry at the moment, clients are always looking to value engineer stuff, let alone about thinking about sustainability. And I was talking to somebody, as I mentioned, someone who was in the property sector, someone quite senior, and he said to me that sustainable building costs twice as much as normal building. And this is the kind of the mindset that's going at the moment, is that whenever we are talking about natural capital or sustainability in the construction, oh no, we can't touch that, it's too expensive. So again, it's that culture of where do we get those resources financially to be able to back all the how do you go about it in construction industry? It's a huge challenge for us because the finance need to be there. And I think Dr. Mark and Veronica said, what we're saying is good, but how do you get expertise to come through? Where are the experts to advise us, look, and especially we do a lot of damage to the environment, you know, from the raw material to the finished product, and then we keep emitting CO2 emissions and the rest. So there's a bigger picture to this, and we really need to think about the risk that we are causing to the industry and to the world.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like just to give the opportunity now to air some of the questions that people have been putting online, because time is running a bit short. So let me just put this one to you. One of our, Robert Chapman, has asked the question of, what do we really mean by business growth? You know, how is the growth defined? Are we talking about smart growth that doesn't deplete the planet? What about sustainable growth as per donut economics by Kate Raworth? Is anyone familiar with that? Maybe Mark, that's your field.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm an expert at the donut economics, but I'm familiar with it. Look, there is growth and there is sustainable growth, and we still live in a world where the laggards can undercut the responsible people. So let's put that out there, that the governance systems under which business operates have not caught up with this natural capital ecosystem service sustainability agenda to any really substantive extent yet. And I think changing the legislation, the regulation, to create level playing fields that acknowledge the values of nature is the most fundamental thing. Because, you know, we can go onto eBay and we can buy what we want wherever we want it, and we buy on price by and large. And that's all of us, not just the consumers, but businesses. And until that is challenged and the distributional costs are factored in, then we're still playing a losing game. I mean, this is one of the points I'd really like to make about the value of nature. Ecosystem services are absolutely not about putting a value on nature. They are absolutely about putting a value on what nature does. So think of nature as a verb rather than a noun, really. And the values we're talking about are very plural as well. And distributional as well. I mean, I've done a lot of work with big dams around the world. And generally the mathematics of them is we spend this much on concrete, we get twice as much value in water and twice as much in energy, therefore it's a 4-to-1 benefit to cost. Happy days. But of course we don't factor in the changes in the ecosystem, the loss of the migratory fish, the spiritual sites, the fertilization of floodplains, the skewing of the ecosystem use from the subsistence towards short-term liquidation. And this is the big policy world, an economic world that we have to get into. Some of the big businesses are very much leaders in this regard. Governments really need to be led to create a level playing field wherein these multiple values are brought onto the table. And we can see that company A's use of this resource is disenfranchising other stakeholders through the services of nature.
Thank you. That's a very clear answer to the question of the donut idea. I'm just looking at some of the other questions as we go through. Someone's asked, are people natural capital? And Veronique has said, yes, absolutely. We are part of the what we would call. I think we've got some background. If speakers can mute, please, that would be good. And someone's also asking a question, I think, which is quite a good one, about is the science behind all of this, too easily to be disputed by politicians, and should we be placing, I think, greater, just trusting the science and getting on with what needs to be done?
Well, as a scientist, I'm obviously going to say yes, but political deafness to science is a global disease. I mean, just take climate change. There is absolutely no dissent in the science community about the reality of it, the threat of it, and really the only open question is the reversibility of it. And yet, at the political world, at political level, people are unwilling to cede advantage as they see it to less developed countries to gain economic advantage. I mean, it's very much the Trump case there, that why should advantages be given to China? And that is totally in ignorance of the science and just sees the world as a cake to be cut up and digested by the most powerful. So gaining some permeability in the policy and the political world to the emphatic realities of science is a massive challenge for us all.
Veronique, I wonder if you have views on the...
So I will say yes, of course, we need science and scientists, but also we need more economists involved in the question of biodiversity and natural capital. Most of the time, I notice that it's quite difficult for businessmen to understand scientists. Some of them not Mark, but some of them are very, with scientist words, scientist methodology, and it's quite difficult for businessmen to access to this knowledge, and that's a part of my job to translate or to be a kind of mediator between science and business. But I think that we need more economists, and we can see some previous banker or economists try to put their science to this subject, because, as I said previously, I think there is no taboo to talk about biodiversity in economic and financial terms. It will help and very quickly to. It will be very helpful for business to can manage this subject. Like I will say. Any other subject they have to manage in the day. So they need numbers, they need, risk assessments. So we have to translate the science in business and economic words to raise the awareness of businessmen. So science is very important, and has we could say for the climate change, the members and all the reports from the IPCC are very important, and I think it will be the same next week with the big conference for the IPBES, but. We need, for business, for corporates, they need some tools that they are used to use all the day. And, metrics, and it's very convenient for them.
Yeah, and as you say, so the climate change debate, if you look at the World Economic Forum's annual risk report, I think for the last 3 years they put climate change as the biggest risk in terms of impact and likelihood. And we have all of the other things going on around climate change, and yet still the political appetite for really taking action is somewhat limited. And so perhaps the answer is really more to get the tools out there to businesses, and businesses start to see some sort of advantage to them by being responsible, if you like. Then perhaps it's not so much pressure on the politicians that we need as business themselves taking ownership of the agenda and just doing the right thing with all, of course, the right equipment in terms of tools and expertise. Well, I think that's a good point for us to wrap up, as the clock is against us as ever. So thank you to experts. Firstly, Veronique Dam, founder of BioDiv Corp, a biodiversity consultant in Paris. Thanks also to Dr. Mark Everard, Associate Professor of Ecosystem Services at the University of West England, Bristol. And finally, thanks also to Anil Singh Rana, FRICS, construction founder at CPD Limited, who has joined us today from Mauritius. And thank you to everyone who joined to listen to the discussion and submitted questions. Please do visit our website, rics.org, and you'll be able to see some of our materials on this, particularly a publication on regenerative landscape, and you can download these for free. You'll find with the resources for this webinar direct links to those, so you don't have to search for them, and those links can be found on your screen, I think, if you scroll down. And let me just say a word about our next webinar coming up. In a month's time, we'll be partnering with the International Finance Corporation to look at how we can make cities smart. So that's going to be a very exciting and interesting one. And the second time we'll have had the IFC on one of our webinar editions. And then finally, I just want to share with you the discount code for anyone that might be in New York in the 13th and 14th of May for the World Business Environment Forum Summit, which is looking at investment in real assets. Do let us know what you thought of the webinar by completing the online poll, and do please we very much look forward to you joining us for the next webinar on the 21st of May. Thank you.